How many countries are there in the world? Doesn't have one single answer. The United Nations recognizes 193 member states, plus 2 observer states. That makes 195. But if you add Taiwan, Kosovo, the number can rise to 197 or even more. Some countries recognize these states, others don't. And just like that, what seems like a clear answer becomes a global debate. You see, geography, even something as basic as the number of countries, can be surprisingly confusing. And the facts we'll uncover next might surprise you even more. Here's a question for you. Which country has the most time zones in the world? Most people quickly say United States, or maybe Russia, but the real answer is France. That's right, France. And no, it's not because the mainland is huge. It's because of its overseas territories scattered all around the globe, from French Polynesia in the Pacific to New Caledonia and islands in the Caribbean and Indian Ocean. Altogether, France spans 12 official time zones. That's more than any other country in the world. Speaking of time zones, if France has the most time zones, then China might just hold the opposite kind of record. China is one of the widest countries in the world. It stretches across 5 natural time zones, but surprisingly, the entire country runs on only one. That's right, one single official time zone. Beijing time. This means when the sun rises in Beijing, it could still be completely dark in the far west. In Xinjiang, for example, the sun can rise as late as 10 a.m. local solar time. To adapt, many locals there use 2 clocks, Beijing time for official life and unofficial local time for their daily routines. One country, 5 time zones, but just one official hour. Now that's a scheduling challenge. Which U.S. state is closest to Africa? Most people instantly think of Florida. After all, it's right on the Atlantic coast, pointing straight toward the east. But that's not the correct answer. The closest state to Africa is actually Maine. The westernmost point of Africa is Cape Verde Peninsula in Senegal. And if you draw a straight line across the Atlantic from there, it reaches Maine first, not Florida. When you look at a world map, it feels pretty straightforward. Big countries look big. Small countries look small. But that's not exactly true. Most of the maps we grew up with use the Mercator projection. And while it's great for navigation, it seriously distorts the size of countries. Take Greenland, for example. On most maps, it looks almost as big as Africa. Try going to the website The True Size and drag the map of Greenland to the equator, where the map is at its truest size. Greenland is 14 times smaller than Africa. Or look at Brazil. It often looks smaller than Australia, but it's actually larger. And Africa might be the most underestimated of all. Because of map projection, Africa often looks surprisingly small. But the real Africa? It's massive. You could fit United States, China, India, and much of Europe inside Africa, and still have space left over. Covering over 30 million square kilometers, Africa is larger than the US, China, India, and most of Europe combined. We often talk about the East and the West as if the world is neatly divided in half. But where exactly does that line begin? The answer lies at the Greenwich Meridian, the official prime meridian, marked as 0 degrees longitude. It runs right through, a district in, and it's the reference point for every time zone on Earth. But here's something most people don't know. Before it was standardized in 1884, more than a dozen countries used their own prime meridians. This had one, even had one. So depending on where you lived, East and West weren't always the same. And even today, the story isn't perfectly straight. With modern GPS technology, scientists discovered the true zero-degree line doesn't actually pass through the moor anymore. It's about 100 meters east. So next time you visit Greenwich and stand on that famous metal line, technically, you're not standing at 0 degrees longitude. Here's something we rarely question. When we look at a map, north is always on top, east is to the right, west to the left, and south at the bottom. It feels so natural that most of us assume it's some kind of rule of nature, but it isn't. North on top is just a human decision, a cartographic convention. Before the modern map standard, things looked very different. Many old maps placed east or south on top instead. In Islamic cartography during the medieval period, south was often placed at the top of the world. Why? Because for many cultures, orientation depended on their world view, not a universal rule. It wasn't until European navigation became dominant that north was standardized at the top. When we think of Russia and United States, we imagine two superpowers separated by oceans, continents, and politics. But geographically, they're shockingly close. Between Little Diomede Island in the US and Big Diomede Island in Russia, there's just a 4-kilometer water gap across the Bering Strait. On a clear day, you can literally stand on one island and see the other country with the naked eye. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. These two islands are separated not just by a border, but by the international date line. That means there's a 21-hour time difference between them. You could stand on the US side, look across the water, and quite literally see tomorrow. Between Egypt and Sudan sits a small trapezoid-shaped patch of desert called Bir Tawil. And here's the strange part. Neither country wants it. The reason goes back to a border dispute involving a more valuable area nearby. To claim Bir Tawil would mean giving up the more strategic piece of land, so both countries simply leave it alone. As a result, Bir Tawil is one of the very few places on Earth that's not claimed by any nation. No cities, no laws, just empty desert, sitting quietly between two countries. Borders are usually fixed, aligned between one country and another, but not always. In the river between France and Spain, there's a tiny piece of land called Pheasant Island. What makes it special is how it's shared. Every 6 months, sovereignty over the island switches. France controls it for half the year, then Spain takes over for the other half. No one lives there. There are no cities, no towns, no permanent buildings. But both governments maintain it carefully, honoring a centuries-old agreement. The world's shortest international border lies between Botswana and Zambia. It's at the Kazungula crossing, and it's just 85 meters long. That's shorter than the length of a soccer field. It might not look like much on a map, but it has a surprisingly important role in regional trade and transport. Yes, the tiny 85-meter border we just mentioned is even more fascinating. At the Kazungula area in southern Africa, 4 countries come remarkably close to one another: Botswana, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Namibia. Technically, only Botswana and Zambia share that 85-meter border. But if you stand on the Kazungula Bridge, you can literally see all 4 countries at the same time. Ask anyone to name the tallest mountain in the world, and most people will say Mount Everest. And they're partly right. Everest is the highest peak above sea level, standing at 8,848 meters. But it's not the tallest mountain from base to summit. That title belongs to Mauna Kea in Hawaii. Mauna Kea's base begins deep under the Pacific Ocean, and if you measure it from the seafloor all the way to its peak, its total height is more than 10,000 meters. That's taller than Everest. It's just mostly hidden underwater. And there's more. If we measure by distance from the center of the Earth, the winner is Chimborazo in Ecuador. Because our planet is slightly flattened at the poles, Chimborazo sits farther from Earth's center than Everest. So Everest may be the highest, but Mauna Kea is the tallest, and Chimborazo is literally closer to space. It all depends on how you measure a mountain. We've just talked about the highest places on Earth, but what about the lowest? That title belongs to the shoreline of the Dead Sea, bordering Israel and Jordan. It's the lowest land point on Earth, sitting at around 430 meters below sea level. And here's the striking part. It's still sinking. The water level is dropping by roughly 1 meter every year, driven by both climate change and water diversion from upstream rivers. The highest mountains on Earth have been climbed. The lowest point on land has been measured and explored. But what lies under the ocean is a whole different story. The deepest known point on our planet is the Mariana Trench, located in the western Pacific Ocean. At its lowest point, called Challenger Deep, it plunges nearly 11,000 meters below sea level. That's deeper than Everest is tall. Very few people have ever been down there. The extreme pressure and darkness make it one of the most hostile places on Earth. We often talk about Europe and Asia as two separate continents, but here's the surprise. That division isn't actually based on geography. In reality, Europe and Asia form one continuous landmass known as Eurasia. The so-called boundary between them isn't marked by any dramatic mountain wall or deep ocean trench. It's more of a cultural and historical line than a physical one. From a strictly geographical perspective, Europe is basically just a large peninsula of Asia. In the middle of the Indian Ocean, there's a strange region called the Indian Ocean Geoid Low. It's an area where Earth's gravitational pull is slightly weaker than normal. When satellites pass over this spot, they actually dip lower, as if the planet has a subtle dent. Scientists have studied it for years, but they still don't fully agree on why it exists. One leading theory points to ancient tectonic activity deep below the surface. Ask someone which U.S. state is the farthest west, and they'll likely say Alaska. And that's true. But here's the surprise. Alaska is also the easternmost state in the U.S. at the same time. How? Because the Aleutian Islands stretch so far west that they actually cross the 180th meridian. That puts part of Alaska on the eastern side of the globe by longitude. So, believe it or not, Alaska is the westernmost, the easternmost, and the northernmost U.S. state, all at once. When we hear the word desert, most people imagine endless sand dunes and scorching heat. But the coldest, driest place on Earth is actually a desert too. That place is Antarctica. A desert isn't defined by temperature, it's defined by low precipitation. And Antarctica gets almost none. One region, the McMurdo Dry Valleys, hasn't seen rain for nearly 2 million years. So while the Sahara may be hot and dry, Antarctica is freezing, and just as dry, if not more. A desert at the bottom of the world. Here's a classic geography question that trips people up. What's the capital of Australia? Most people quickly answer Sydney. Some might say Melbourne, but neither is correct. The real capital is Canberra. Why? Because Sydney and Melbourne were fierce rivals, and the government chose Canberra as a compromise, building a brand new capital right between them. Australia isn't the only country where the capital surprises people. Ask most people to name the capital of Brazil, and you'll often hear Rio de Janeiro or Sao Paulo. But the real answer is neither of them. The capital is Brasilia. Unlike many cities that grew naturally over time, Brasilia was a planned city, built from scratch in the 1960s. The goal was to move the political center away from the crowded coastline and place it right in the heart of the country. Most countries have one capital city, but South Africa decided to do things differently. Instead of one, it has 3 capitals, each with its own special role. Pretoria is the executive capital, where the president and government offices are located. Cape Town is the legislative capital, home to the national parliament. And Bloemfontein is the judicial capital, where the Supreme Court of Appeal is based. This unique setup was created to balance power among different regions of the country. Is the Caspian Sea actually a sea or a lake? It's bordered by Russia, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Iran, and Azerbaijan. And here's why it's confusing. The Caspian Sea is the largest inland body of water in the world. It has no natural outlet to the ocean. If it were classified as a sea, the water, and all the resources beneath it, would be divided according to international maritime law. But if it were a lake, the countries would have to split it equally or negotiate borders. And that's a big deal, because we're talking about billions of dollars in oil and gas reserves. After decades of negotiation, in 2018, the surrounding countries agreed to a compromise. The Caspian Sea is treated as neither fully a sea nor a lake, but a special legal category of its own. The Caspian Sea isn't the only sea with a misleading name. Another famous example is the Aral Sea. It's located between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, and despite its name, it's not a sea at all. It's an inland lake. Not long ago, the Aral Sea was the 4th largest lake in the world. But massive irrigation projects in the 20th century diverted the rivers that fed it. The result was catastrophic. The water level dropped drastically, and much of the lake turned into desert, a new landscape now known as the Aral Cum Desert. The Arabian Peninsula has no rivers. Despite its massive size, it has no permanent rivers at all. The land is dominated by vast deserts, including some of the driest areas on Earth. Instead of rivers, the region relies on wadis, dry riverbeds that only fill with water during rare rains. From Saudi Arabia to Oman and beyond, not a single permanent river flows through this entire peninsula. When people try to imagine the center of the world, most picture somewhere in Europe or Asia. It just feels like the middle of everything. But the true geographical center of all Earth's landmasses is actually located near Giza in Egypt, surprisingly close to the famous pyramids. This is the point on the globe that best balances the world's continents around it. Geography isn't just about lines on a map. It's about how our world connects, changes, and sometimes surprises us. Even the simplest facts can turn out to be more complex than we think. Which of these facts surprised you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more journeys around our fascinating world.